Hi, my name is Steven and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about what I would buy if I had $1 million. Thoughts from an extreme cheapskate. In this modern capitalistic world, I want to go through the exercise of what I would buy if I had $1 million next day. And coming from a self-proclaimed extreme cheapskate, I wonder what I would actually buy given my thrifty ways. Because for the longest time, I just want to save money as much as I can. And I put no actual thought into seeing what I would actually buy if I had money coming my way. While most people would probably spend that money on lavish vacations, fancy cars, or even houses, I would want to go a different path. And for me, this is going to be a more cheapskate and pragmatic approach to what I would spend that money on. For me, I want to buy things with a lot of value for the best buck that I can get it for. And make sure to spend that $1 million as far as it'll possibly go. Every now and then, I like to go through the fun exercise of what I would actually do with that $1 million. And given my frugal background, I want to showcase what an extreme cheapskate would spend their money on. Because as much as I want to spend that money, I have to strike a balance between fiscal responsibility and lavishly spending it. Although I do come from thrifty backgrounds, I do want to have the ability to self-indulge every once in a while. Because sometimes it's just far more fun to spend on something and not have to worry about rigorous tracking of your money. So let's see what a cheapskate would buy with $1 million. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about the background, what I would spend that $1 million on, and my general thoughts. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share with friends, hit that notification bell if you like this content. And here we go. As a child, I always dreamed about what I would spend $1 million on. Back in the 90s, movies like Richie Rich and Blank Check fascinated me about young kids with $1 million. And it showed me what the extravagant and fun lifestyle it would bring to that child. I wanted to be like that kid in the movies, spending money frivolously. So as a child, I always had a goal set out to get $1 million someday. Now that I'm a lot older, I no longer have that specific goal just because of how hard it is to actually obtain it. But not only that, $1 million is not a lot of purchase power these days. $1 million can be used up in quite a hurry if you're not carefully spending that money. Recently, I got asked the question about what I would spend $1 million on, and to be honest, I haven't thought about that question recently. With everything going on in my life, the last thing in my mind is what I would actually spend on myself. The normal answers of buying a luxury car, a down payment on a house, and lavish vacations didn't even come to mind. It was more about how I can leverage that money to make more money, but not actually spend it on things that I would enjoy. But I actually have to stop myself because the question is what I would actually spend money on for fun. So here's my answer to what I would spend if I had $1 million. And coming from my family's frugal background, it's going to be a lot different than what normal people would want to spend their money on. But I hope it helps you, the viewer, to understand a little bit about my frugal background. So here's what I would spend my million on. Number one, a used car. While the average millionaire would probably get a luxury high-end car, I would go for a used one. Because while it's so easy to get a new car fresh off the lot, it just isn't a good deal for me. One of the biggest things for me is that I don't drive a lot, at least not anymore since I moved out of LA. That means I'm not on the road a lot and I don't need a flashy car. And this means I really need a fuel efficient car because the miles that I am going, I'm not going to need a lot of gas for. So it does me no good to buy a brand new car to just have it sit in my parking spot. And definitely I'm not the kind of person that wants to flash a new car out in the streets of Seattle. A well-maintained and slightly older car with low mileage is something that I'm searching for. This would ensure that I get the maximum value for my buck. As long as the value is good and the car is functional, I'm not going to have any problems with it. I'm not going to find the flashiest used car anyways, but functionality reigns supreme. I've been definitely in need of an updated car for a while now. Ever since I moved to Seattle, I've had an issue going into the snowy mountains and not having four-wheel drive. This, along with the rainy days, requires me to have a little bit newer car just for the safety features. Something with modern electronics like a rear view camera and Bluetooth would be nice. And also if they had heated seats in the car as well, that would be great. But even though I really want those things and want an updated car, I haven't had the need to actually go out and buy or look for a used car. I just feel like I could squeeze more miles of the current car that I have, and it will be fine. But if I did have a fresh million to spend it on, I would get a used car for sure. Number two, travel cheap. As a cheapskate, I want to travel cheap wherever I go, regardless of how much money I have. Even though if I had an extra $1 million, I would not go and do luxury travel at all. This means I'm not going to fly first class or stay in 5-star hotels if I can help it. Ultimately, I still want to go through the exercise of finding the cheapest way to travel and look for deals and go to places that are on discount rather than the full price. There are just so many loyalty programs and credit card perks that I don't have to pay for full price travel. And part of the fun is searching through that perfect place where you get the best deal. At least that's what drives me when I start to plan my vacations. I get the most fun out of planning a cheapskate itinerary so that I can ultimately have a globe-trotting experience without breaking the bank. Most people would ask, why travel cheap if you have $1 million at your disposal? Well, the ultimate goal of mine when I travel is to see the world and all of it. If I spend that $1 million on just a couple of places, then I can quickly exhaust my $1 million. A couple of first class tickets are $25K each, and that can be very expensive. So rather than blow all my money on a couple of places, I want to try to maximize that value and see the world as much as I can. My wife and I have gone on trips to South Africa, Dubai, and Europe for all less than $3,000. And we were able to do that because we maximized the value we gain from travel hacking. So when I do have access to more money, I will want to extend that streak to different places, but still keep under a $5K budget. Where the money does come in handy is for those hard to reach places like Antarctica, where you have to spend an X amount of dollars to even get there. Those are the extreme places that I would spend that $1 million on, and places that I might need security escorts because it might not be safe for travelers. And at the end of the day, you can use that money also as a backup plan in case your primary plan fails. You might need to then book a hotel or flight at full cost because there's no other options available to you. So with that $1 million, I would want to plan a lot of trips around the world for as cheaply as I can possibly get them for, so that I can maximize the most amount of places that I can see in my lifetime. Number 3, more tiny houses. In my previous videos, I talk a lot about the tiny houses that I currently have as rental units. And these are great investment properties because the return on investment is a lot higher than actual houses on land. I use these houses because they're a cheaper way to get into real estate without having to buy a full $1 million house in Seattle. And their smaller size and lower maintenance costs is a win-win in terms of maintenance. And they have lower traditional maintenance costs than primary houses. So as a cheapskate millionaire, I want to do my best to get more of these units on as rentals, and create more of these units and put them in places where hotels and Airbnbs are not readily available. The cost of these houses are traditionally $100K to $150K depending on the size of that house. And it is, if built properly, a great place to house families for the weekend. With an extra $1 million, I would use a portion of that money to buy maybe 4 or 5 additional houses, and hopefully be able to generate rental income after they've been built and put on the market, so that I have a rolling income stream for the future. A single $1 million in Seattle would otherwise buy one house, but with tiny houses, I can buy multiple of them. So it's a better deal for me. And crucially for me, I own that title outright. I don't have to share it with the bank because of a loan. So I definitely would spend that part of $1 million to buy more tiny houses. Number 4, investments. For whatever's left after I spend on the other 3 things, I would put the rest into investments. And I would put that money into an index fund or an ETF or something stable that grows over time. And this would be just a risk-averse way to grow my money without having to worry about it. And ideally, this would be easy to access so that I can use it as an emergency fund if needed. And I would not touch that investment if I can help it. Just buy and hold for as long as I can. Because the cheapskate in me wants to save at least some part of that $1 million. And I want to prioritize long-term growth over short-term speculative gains. This investment would help me with my financial long-term outlook. And it generally would be a more safe place than just having it in the bank or in a speculative asset. My go-to favorites for ETFs are VTI and VOO. They're diversified enough for my taste to buy and hold it. Although I could make the case of not buying anything and spending that entire $1 million on investments like VTI in the first place, and use the gains from that ETF over time to buy the things that I want. Or use that money in an investment of a small business so that it can also compound. I do think it's ultimately a good idea to invest that entire $1 million rather than spending it on something. But for the purposes of this video, these are some of the things that I would spend on if I had $1 million and I needed to spend it on something. At the end of the day, I just don't feel right not saving some part of that $1 million, and this investment is it. So here are my general thoughts on what I would spend my $1 million on. Only when I was really young did I want to spend $1 million all in one go. But that was because I didn't know the maintenance or reoccurring costs of the things that I would buy. Unless you rent that object and return it later, you're going to have maintenance costs on whatever you buy for the long term. Whether that's a house, a luxury car, or a boat, you'll need to have reoccurring payments on it. And you can quickly get into a situation where you run out of money and you have to go into debt to finance those things. Especially if you buy something like a house and you have property taxes and maintenance costs that were unexpected. That house might be $1 million, but you might spend way more in paying those property taxes. Even now, I'm extremely cautious on what I pay for on a reoccurring basis. This is to ensure that I don't pay out more each month than I actually make, and that I don't end up indebted to the bank or anybody else. Lastly, even though it's $1 million, it just doesn't go far enough these days. Even though having $1 million would be a blessing to anyone, it just doesn't go as far as it did 20 years ago. Especially in high cost of living areas like Seattle or Los Angeles or New York. that money is insufficient to buy a house in a good neighborhood in those cities. And that also doesn't account for the ongoing expenses to maintain that house. So I think the ability to have a cheapskate mindset going into these kinds of things is a great ability to have. Because at the end of the day, with a frugal mindset, you can live on less and be okay with it. You haven't adjusted to a lavish lifestyle, and that doesn't handcuff you to maintain that lifestyle. And you're okay with not having the ultimate best in your life. But it's definitely the best way to stretch your money. So those are the things that I would spend $1 million on. Even though it might seem like a lot, if you're living a typical American lifestyle, it just doesn't go far enough. Especially those lifestyles highlighted in TV and movies. Growing up, I thought that $1 million would set me up for life. But as an adult, I know $1 million can disappear in an instant if you're not careful with your money. But it's definitely fun to think about what you would buy if you had instantly $1 million in your pocket. But it's definitely fun to think about from time to time, and the answer to that question can help highlight and understand who you really are. So with that, I hope you enjoy what I would buy with $1 million as an extreme cheapskate. So thank you for watching. Please leave me a comment down below on what would you buy with $1 million and would it change your life? And I'll see you next time.